Opening an offshore bank account as an American is actually 10 times faster and easier than you'd think. And you can do it with deposits as low as $5,000 with good banks and some of the best offshore banking jurisdictions available. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to open your offshore account, how much you'll need to deposit, and the 5 best countries for Americans to use when going offshore. So let's start with how to open accounts. And this is going to be the shortest section of the video because there are only 5 steps. And step number 1 is super straightforward. Step number 2 is something I wish more people thought about. And step number 3 is what normally stops Americans from successfully opening offshore. And then step 4 and step 5 are going to tell you exactly where you can open those offshore accounts. All right, so step number 1, determining your reason for going offshore. Now, we typically see 3 categories of Americans who end up opening offshore bank accounts. First are the cross-border investors. These are guys who own international assets, think real estate, companies, or even investment portfolios in markets that they can't get exposure to from their US brokerage account. They basically need offshore accounts to facilitate investments or even make executing investments faster and easier. Second are the American expats. These are folks who live in foreign countries, either as full-time residents or traveling around as digital nomads. The point is, they don't live full-time in the US, and they need or want international and offshore accounts to support their cross-border lifestyle, maybe to make local payments or just take cash out of local ATMs. Now, our last group, which I suspect a lot of people watching this video are going to fall into, is what we call Plan B Americans. These are pragmatic individuals who just want a bit of diversification in terms of countries, currencies, and even financial institutions. Now, these guys, they're not moving all their money into a different country, at least not most of the time. Instead, they're typically moving 10 to 20% of their liquid net worth into reputable banks in top banking jurisdictions. And I'm going to tell you 5 banking hubs that we think Americans should be considering in the next section of this video. But if you prefer to get a personalized list of countries that we think you should be considering based on your profile and your objectives, you can submit a free assessment right now just using the link in the description. And our team will get back to you within 24 hours. Okay, now step number 2. And this one is all about money. More specifically, deciding how much money you want to deposit. Now, I can't help you decide how much money you want to put offshore, but what I can say is that there are solutions for Americans across almost every deposit level, whether you want to open with $1,000 or $10 million. We know which banks will work for Americans across every level of deposit. Now, that doesn't mean all these banks are worth using. In fact, we typically only work with Americans who want to deposit at least $100,000 as a minimum. But like I said, in the second half of the video, I'm going to share countries where Americans can open with as little as $5,000. And you can get started opening those accounts on your own. Now, if you do open accounts offshore, there's a really important step that so many people overlook, which is step number 3. And I'm talking about understanding your reporting obligations. Because if you're a US person, you have reporting obligations that you need to meet every year if you have qualifying foreign financial accounts. Basically, you need to submit 2 forms each year. And it's actually really straightforward. First, the FBAR. This is FinCEN Form 114. It gets filed by any US person with financial accounts outside of the United States where the aggregate value of those accounts exceeds $10,000 at any time during the calendar year. And this gets filed online, directly with FinCEN through an e-filing system. It's surprisingly simple. Now, next up is Form 8938. Now, this is FATCA reporting, and it just gets attached to your income tax filing. It's pretty easy. Now here, the reporting threshold for your financial accounts is higher than the FBAR, which again was $10,000 in total, and it just applies to everyone across the board. But 8938 has 4 different reporting categories: single or married living in the US, and then single or married living outside of the US. So if you're in the US and you're single, you need to file 8938 if your account balance is $50,000 or more at the end of the year, or if it crossed $75,000 at any point during the year. Next up, if you're married and in the US, the numbers double, so $100,000 or more at the end of the year, or $150,000 at any point during the year. And if you live outside the US as a bona fide resident of another country, these numbers jump up to $200,000 and $300,000 for single, and then $400,000 and $600,000 for married. And quick note here, if you're married filing separately, you fall into the single category, and then if you're married filing jointly, you fall into the married category. Listen, the point is, if you decide that you need or want an offshore account and you're a US person, and then you meet these reporting requirements, you need to submit these forms. It's an easy process, it's super straightforward, and if you don't submit them, then the penalties, they're going to be steep. So please make sure you do. Okay, now, like I said, step 4 and step 5, they're going to tell you where to open your offshore account. And step 4 is one that only Americans need to worry about, because it's all about finding offshore banks that accept US citizens. Because most offshore and international banks will not accept US citizens. Now, finding these banks, it can be very time consuming, and even if you do find one that can theoretically accept a US person, you might not find one that actually matches your profile. Meaning they're not willing to accept clients with your source of income, investment objectives, and even the deposit that you're willing to make, like we talked about in steps 1 through 3. Plus, depending on the bank, you might find that the fees they're trying to charge just make no sense at all, which we see happening a lot. So you really need to be careful about where you decide to try and open accounts. And that brings us to step number 5, which is choosing which country to bank in. Now, I'm going to give you specific countries to consider in a second, but first I want to explain the 3 options that you have when it comes to banking offshore as an American, meaning the 3 types of countries that you can choose from. All right, so first, there's what we call AOB countries. These are countries that offer accessible offshore banking. And here, you're not unlocking world-class private banking. Instead, you're getting strong and stable offshore banking for a fraction of the deposit. You're probably looking at fees, though in a lot of cases, you will be able to offset those fees with a fixed deposit or by maintaining a minimum deposit. Now, the second category is what we call premier banking. This can go by a lot of different names. You might know it as priority banking, premier banking, or even premium banking. Now, as an American, this is without a doubt the hardest category for you to get into, especially if you live in the US. But there are still very attractive premier banking options available to you, and it's even at a relatively low deposit in one of our favorite offshore banking hubs, which I'm going to share with you in a second. Now, the third and final category is private banking. We all know what this is. You open an account, park a large sum of money, and then the bank helps you make as much money as humanly possible every single year, and you pay them a small percentage for their efforts. Or at least that's how it's supposed to work. And if you choose the right bank, it is how it works. Now, as an American, you might be surprised to find out that you do have plenty of options in the private banking category, but they can be really hard to find. They often have quotas, and you're going to need to deposit a good chunk of change in order to get your foot in the door. And I'll tell you exactly how much in a second. But just as a quick reminder, if you want to avoid all the guesswork and just have our team tell you exactly where you should open accounts and even how much you'll need to deposit in each of the countries you can consider, just fill out a free assessment linked in the description below, and we'll tell you within 24 hours which countries are best for you. Okay, now section 2 of the video. So in our opinion, the lowest acceptable amount to open an offshore bank account is $5,000, though even here, you're still on the very low end of the ladder. It's going to be tough to find options at $5,000, and the banks here, they're going to be lower quality in most cases, though there are a few exceptions. Now, the other reason that $5,000 is tough is because you're also going to be facing account maintenance fees, which can be challenging to offset with such a low amount of money. For that reason, the next rung on the ladder, $25,000, is often a better place to start because here you can usually offset even the highest monthly fees with a fixed deposit. Now, the banks that you can access at $25,000, they're going to be very similar to those at $5,000, but you will have more to choose from, and you'll even have a couple extra countries to consider. And the same is true for the third rung on the ladder, which is $125,000. In fact, the only major difference between $25,000 and $125,000 is a really interesting option that our team has been working with for Americans. This enables US citizens to open an offshore premier bank account for a fraction of the deposit that they're required to make in most other countries. Don't worry, I'm going to highlight the $125,000 option for you in the country section, which is coming up next. But first, we have 2 more levels to cover, starting with $250,000. This is your standard premier deposit level that you're going to expect in most major banking hubs. Now, like I said, premier banking, it's very tough for Americans, especially if they live in the US, but there are a couple options that you can still consider. Though, interestingly, most Americans who are considering premier banking, they're going to find that the $125,000 option that I'm going to share with you is much better suited to their needs than the $250,000 or even the $25,000 option. And there are a few reasons for this, but really it all comes down to restrictions and fees. Now, the final rung on the ladder, it's quite the jump. We're going from $250,000 to $2 million. And the reason that this is such a big jump is because we're talking about accessing private banking in some of the best banking hubs on the planet. Now, in certain cases, we can help Americans open with $1 million, but most banks want to see at least $2 million to open accounts. All right, so that was deposits. Now, you probably want to know which countries I'm talking about. Well, I'm going to tell you right now. But first, this isn't an exhaustive list, but it will include the most common places where our American clients end up opening accounts. And it's going to include examples from each of these 3 categories in each of the 5 deposit levels that I just mentioned. And the first example we're going to look at, it's accessible offshore banking at the $5,000 range. Again, here we're talking about banks that will be able to offer basic account services. So you should expect a checking account with a debit card, multi-currency access, think US dollar, sterling, Canadian, and Aussie dollar, Swiss francs, maybe some Japanese yen, renminbi, but you're not going to be accessing any investing at this level. And there's really no other services that you can unlock because your balance is just too low. The point is, you're opening this account with this low of a deposit for one reason, which is to have an offshore emergency fund. So you know that you'll always have some money in a safe jurisdiction for a bit of added protection just in case. And you're usually going to be paying for the privilege of opening this account. And fees, they're typically going to range between $20 and $50 per month, so $240 to $500 per year, depending on the bank. Now, a good example of where you can find this sort of banking is Panama. Now, I've described Panama as a good starting point for offshore banking before because basically it's a great way to dip your toe into the offshore world without needing to fully commit or even move yourself abroad. Plus, the deposits, they're super low. And while it can be difficult to open accounts as a foreign non-resident, it's not impossible. There are banks that we help our clients open with all the time by pre-qualifying them directly with the bank, making direct introductions, and then providing ongoing support until their accounts are fully operational. Now, this next level is still accessible offshore banking, but we're jumping into $25,000. And this is kind of a weird place to be coming in at because you're still going to have a lot of the same banking options available that you can access with $5,000. But instead of paying for the account, you'll either be able to offset the fees with a fixed deposit, meaning you commit to locking up $25,000 for a certain amount of time, and then the interest earned covers your fees, or you'll be able to access banks that won't charge you a fee because you're maintaining a minimum balance that's acceptable to them, such as $25,000. Now, no surprise here, Panama is still an option to consider for Americans at the $25,000 level, but you have other options to consider as well. And one that's not as widely used is the Bahamas. Now, I'm not really sure what the average person thinks about the Bahamas from a banking perspective right now, but it's an interesting option if you're looking for diversification. Again, to set up an offshore emergency fund. And basically to get yourself started with a plan B in the fastest and easiest way possible, which is opening an offshore bank account. All right, now rolling into the next level, we're looking at the $125,000 option that I mentioned earlier. And this is premier banking, but with a lower than usual deposit. And like I said during the deposit section of the video, this option is really only available in one jurisdiction. And this is super unique because the quality of this jurisdiction is on par with many of the other places that Americans need to deposit $2 million or more to access private banking in to enter. But we work with very reputable banks, international banks that offer a tailored solution for American clients who want to deposit at least $125,000 into this particular country. Now, this is especially powerful for Americans with foreign interests, think real estate, frequent travel, maybe cross-border companies, but it doesn't require that you have any of these foreign ties. Instead, a desire for diversification for your wealth and parking money in a strong and stable country is good enough to get your foot in the door at this bank, as long as you can make that $125,000 deposit. And the country that I'm talking about here is Jersey. Now, if you're not familiar with Jersey, it's a British Crown dependency parked 14 miles off the coast of France. It's located in the English Channel. This is a long-standing offshore financial center that's home to respected banks and can offer a wide range of products and services to international clients, including Americans. And if you're an American looking for offshore banking and you can deposit at least $125,000, Jersey can be a very interesting option for you to consider. All right, now the next level takes us up to $250,000, and here we're still talking about premier banking. But it's important to point out that premier banking, it's basically day-to-day banking with a number of extra features and options enabled for people living international lives. So in some ways, it's a cross between your standard checking account and a private bank account. But frankly, it's very tough for Americans to open these accounts because most of the banks in this category, they don't have the internal capabilities to support the necessary tax filings of US citizens, which really means they don't want US citizens as clients, because that would require them to conduct a wide range of extra reporting that's costly, time-consuming, and at this deposit level, it's just not worth it to them. That's why very few banks that offer premier banking at the $250,000 deposit level are willing to onboard Americans. But like I said, options still exist, and one of those options is found in the Isle of Man. Now, given that Americans have so few options at this deposit level, it's important to explore all of the available banks. But personally, if I was looking at the $250,000 level and these were the only banks available to me, I'd go with the $125,000 option in Jersey, or I'd bump up my deposit to open an account in the next country. But before I reveal our last country, just as a reminder, if you want our team to take a quick look at your profile, you can complete the free assessment using the link in the pinned comment or description below. It takes 2 minutes to complete, and we'll tell you which countries you can open bank accounts in as an American in 24 hours. Okay, now private banking. So again, here we're talking about deposits starting at $2 million, though $1 million is possible in certain instances. This is for people looking to invest, looking for diversification, and looking for wealth management. In other words, you're looking for help diversifying and protecting some of your wealth offshore. Now, the vast majority of clients that come to us in this category, they're worth much more than $2 million, say 10 to 20 million in most instances. And in most cases, they're just looking to park a portion of their wealth in a strong and stable jurisdiction with a reputable bank that charges reasonable fees. And they do this because, like everyone else, they have concerns about the future. They're not sure what's going to happen next in the economy, the dollar, or their investments. So they open accounts in a different country to diversify some of their wealth for a rainy day. Now, the number one country for Americans to consider when it comes to opening private bank accounts internationally, it's Switzerland. You see, unlike a lot of countries that play in the private banking space, Switzerland has a number of banks that are willing to onboard US clients. And that means you'll be able to access some of the strongest banks in what is arguably the strongest banking hub on the planet. But I should warn you, Switzerland is not as straightforward as most people think. And a big reason for that is that everyone complicates the account opening process. So I decided to explain all of the rules of opening a Swiss bank account that no one else will tell you in this video right here. So go ahead, click that, and I'll see you over there right now.